1945. World War II is coming to an end, and it is clear who won the war. Treaties between the Axis and the Allies commence, largely led by the British and the United States. Although the war has ended in Europe, tensions were still high between the Soviet Union and the United States. Both countries competed to become the world's greatest superpower. The Soviets, communists, Red Army, country of evil. They were known and hated in many ways by Americans. Led by Alexei Kosygin, the premier of the Soviet Union, both countries competed in everything, from space to food to weapons.
The Soviet Union and the United States had a very rocky relationship throughout the mid-20th century. Interruptions during speeches, boycotting global events, etc. Exchange between the two nations occurred with the bridge of spies. The two superpowers would release captured spies in return of getting their own spies back.
The following is Richard Nixon explaining the ABM Treaty on May 20th, 1971 in Washington.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, the Soviet-American talks on limiting nuclear arms have been deadlocked for over a year. As a result of negotiations involving the highest level of both governments, I am announcing today a significant development in breaking the deadlock. The statement that I shall now read is being issued simultaneously in Moscow and Washington. Washington, 12 o'clock, Moscow, 7 p.m. The governments of the United States and the Soviet Union, after reviewing the course of their talks on the limitation of strategic armaments, have agreed to concentrate this year on working out an agreement for the limitation of the deployment of anti-ballistic missile systems, ABMs. They have also agreed that together with concluding an agreement to limit ABMs, they will agree on certain measures with respect to the limitation of offensive strategic weapons. The two sides are taking this course in the conviction that it will create more favorable conditions for further negotiations to limit all strategic arms. These negotiations will be actively pursued. This agreement is a major step in breaking the stalemate on nuclear arms talks. Intensive negotiations, however, will be required to translate this understanding into a concrete agreement. This statement that I have just read expresses the commitment of the Soviet and American governments at the highest levels to achieve that goal. If we succeed, this joint statement that has been issued today may well be remembered as the beginning of a new era in which all nations will devote more of their energies and their resources, not to the weapons of war, but to the works of peace.
The SALT talks were centered around two technological advancements, ICBMs and ABMs. Before ABMs came around, no big conference was needed. But when ABMs came, it became clear that any all-out war could be stopped by the other country. This is why the SALT talks were needed.
In the late 1960s, the Soviet Union started to build up its ICBM arsenal to equal that of the US. ICBMs are intercontinental ballistic missiles. These were powerful computer-guided missiles that can hit any target using its global positioning system.
In January 1967, President Lyndon B. Johnson announced that the Soviet Union had begun to construct a limited anti-ballistic missile (ABM) defense system around Moscow, which meant that if the U.S. were to launch any ICBMs, the ABMs could stop an attack. In 1967, he and a Soviet official met in New Jersey to discuss. You might be thinking, what's the big deal about these missiles? No way they will launch them at us. The Army will defend us. These were the reassuring thoughts that were relayed to citizens throughout the country during the Cold War. People thought that nothing bad would happen to them. But believe me, you would not want to be on the receiving end of these missiles. Hitler wanted to use these ICBMs in the war, but fortunately, a working prototype could not be made. One of these could wipe out life within a 1.5-mile radius, and one warhead typically carried many different missiles and could hit multiple targets at once.
United States generals and advisors suggested that U.S. pump up production in order to intimidate the Soviets. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara argued that escalating the arsenal could lead to something worse than the original situation. so he proposed the idea of limiting the offensive and defensive ballistic missiles in order to stabilize the situation.
President Lyndon B. Johnson tried to meet with the Soviets to discuss the situation but could never finish. His successor, Richard Nixon, supported McNamara's position on the weapons arsenal as also wanted to limit arms. Here he called to action the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks 1. He met with Leonid Brezhnev in Helsinki, Finland, to discuss a treaty. For over 2 years, both sides haggled over a treaty that they would both agree on.
On May 26, 1972, the two sides signed the ABM Treaty and agreed to meet again in the future. The ABM Treaty set the limit for the ABMs to be no more than 200 interceptors. It also allowed the opposing powers to construct only 2 defense sites, one to protect the national capital and the other to protect ICBM manufacturing sites.
After multiple conferences and discussions between and within the countries, the two nations finally agreed on a treaty on which they could both agree on. As time passed, the US and the Soviet Union became more friendly with each other, and eventually when the Union disbanded, relations improved exponentially. But nonetheless, many people are still suspicious of Russia and full relations may never be reached.